In October 2001, French ESA astronaut Claudie Haigneré spent 8 days on board the International Space Station, entering it via the Russian door, so to speak. The negotiations for this flight had been made between the French government and the Rosavia-Cosmos, the Russian Aviation and Space Agency. At the top of the three-stage Soyuz launcher, which is about 45 meters high, is the protective fairing which houses the Soyuz spacecraft for the astronauts. Claudie's training had taken place in Star City near Moscow. However, the cosmodrome from where she was launched into space is located in Baikonur in Kazakhstan, and it's also here that the final days of preparation were spent. The crew was made up of 3 persons: the commander in the center, a flight mission engineer on the left — on this mission Claudie Haigneré had this responsibility — and on the right another flight engineer, or a cosmonaut who's a scientist and will carry out an on-board experimental program. This was her 5th mission training at Star City, and Claudie was fortunate enough to be given the important role of first flight engineer through all flight operations. Before docking with the station, the Soyuz capsule is put into orbit in just under 9 minutes. This was her 2nd flight, and getting into orbit was very smooth and gentle this time. She was able to compare it with her 1st mission. Orbital injection happened at around 200 kilometers altitude. To dock with the space station at 400 kilometers altitude at an inclination of 51.6 degrees, corrective maneuvers were carried out on the 3rd and 4th orbits, and then on the 17th orbit. On the 33rd orbit, about 2 days after liftoff, the crew was ready, in phase and at the same height as the station, and docked without problems. Docking took place on Zaira, the first module of the station. Threading your way between the solar panels of this immense structure in order to dock on Zaira is truly impressive. There was another Soyuz craft docked at the junction port, and also a Progress cargo ship in the axial part of the station. The massive solar panels, the vast station, this huge volume in orbit is quite stunning as you approach it. On board the International Space Station was Expedition 3 crew, a team of 3 astronauts. The station had been permanently manned for a year with expedition crews of 3 that change over roughly every 4 months. The station commander, Frank Culbertson, an American, and 2 Russian flight engineers welcomed the Soyuz crew on board. And then, after having brought the new Soyuz craft to the station to act as its lifeboat for the expedition crew, Claudie got straight down to work in space, scientific work this time. Her first impression on arriving was one of recognizing things, because the Russian segment, the service module Zvezda in particular, is very similar to the Mir station base block, with which she'd become familiar during her first mission in 1996. But the International Space Station is not simply a place to live, but really a place to work. The American segment, the US node, and the Destiny laboratory are in fact already fully operational and laid out with racks of experiments. The ISS is a facility with already plenty of room, although not quite enough yet for 6 persons to work there permanently. Claudie Haigneré found it easy to collaborate with her colleagues and perform the scientific part of the Andromède mission, led by France in partnership with Russian laboratories and also involving European institutes, particularly in Germany and Spain. One experiment she was working on concerned a human sense immediately disrupted upon entering microgravity. It is the mental representation one has of one's own environment, how one uses three-dimensional space for orientation. This experiment in cognitive science studied the system of perception and cognitive organization of our representation of space. Another part of the human body immediately affected by being in space is the cardiovascular system and its regulatory mechanisms, and arterial blood pressure in particular. Experiments that had already been set up for several years were refined on Andromède using very precise protocols, flight documentation, procedures, and equipment perfectly adapted for use in microgravity, which, as you know, is very different from use on the ground. Everything was well organized. Europe already has considerable expertise in the preparation of payloads and experiments for the station, which makes life easier for scientists and astronauts when working on board. An experiment in developmental biology, also a follow-up of previous experiments, used larvae of Xenopus and Pleurodel, which are species of frogs and salamanders. Investigation also covered Earth observation. On this mission, some interesting experiments were conducted in view of future automatic missions. For example, filming phenomena that change over time, such as desertification and deforestation, pollution, also of the deltas of major rivers. Another interesting experiment had been developed together with the French Atomic Energy Commission, the CEA, analyzing the so-called sprites, which are light emissions associated with storms and occur in the upper part of the atmosphere, the ionosphere. They're of great interest to scientists. At the same time, the Andromède mission sought to involve children and to attract them to science and technology, and introduce a method of education that is fairly scientific, yet fun, and makes them think. Finally, a series of experiments addressed the field of fluid physics. During her mission, Claudie felt strongly the special role Europeans can play as an interface in this international space station, which at the moment has its Russian and its American modules, with a Japanese module to come and, of course, the European Columbus Laboratory. The ISS already has formidable tools, for example the Canadian robotic arm. Although we shall have to wait for a few more years before the ISS is fully assembled, it already offers an excellent opportunity for work. The return to Earth after a rather short mission, 8 days on board, comes quickly. Time goes by very fast as one is working intensely to suddenly find the hatch being closed. The capsule is disconnected from the station. Re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, slowing down speed a little. Return via parachute and landing once again on the steppes of Kazakhstan. Claudie Haigneré left behind her a new lifeboat for the station, and she came back in the craft that had been brought to the station with this function 6 months earlier. Her mission was ensuring the safety of the expedition crews on the station. The Andromède mission was also an opportunity for France and ESA at a very early stage in the life of the station to participate in its operation, to deliver new payloads there, and to return to Earth with new scientific results.